Flight MU-5735.
Cruising along at 29,000 feet.
And then it just fell. Straight down.
What you just heard, that's the beginning of the absolutely shocking and honestly perplexing story of China Eastern Flight MU-5735. It's a tragedy that has just completely baffled aviation experts all around the world.
So it brings us to the central question that investigators, and really all of us, are trying to wrap our heads around. How can a modern passenger jet, we're talking one of the most reliable planes in the world, how can it just fall out of the sky like a stone? To even begin to understand this mystery, we have to start with the physics of the crash itself. And trust me, it's pretty unbelievable. Get this. In just 1 minute and 35 seconds, the plane went from its cruising altitude all the way to the ground. The flight data shows it was descending at a rate that is just, well, it's terrifying. Now, to put that into perspective for you, right? In a normal emergency, even if the engines totally fail, a plane is designed to glide. It'll descend at maybe a few thousand feet per minute. But MU-5735, it was dropping at nearly 20,000 feet per minute. That's not a glide. That is a free fall. It's more like a skydiver than an airplane. And that is something investigators almost never see. And if that wasn't weird enough, here's maybe the strangest part of the data. Just as it's hurtling towards the ground, right around 8,000 feet, the plane actually regained a little bit of altitude. Just for a moment, before its final fatal plunge. I mean, what could have caused that? That little blip of recovery. It just makes the whole thing even more mysterious. So you've got investigators arriving at this devastating scene, and they're looking at this totally bizarre set of data. So where do they even start? Well, let's walk through their process and see how they began to rule out the obvious stuff first. You know, in any crash investigation, there's a kind of standard checklist of things you look at right away. You've got severe weather, a catastrophic mechanical failure, maybe a terrorist attack, or an issue up in the cockpit, like where the pilot's incapacitated, or, and this is the most disturbing one, was it a deliberate act? All right, so that first one, weather, it was taken off the table almost immediately. The China Meteorological Administration confirmed that conditions were, well, they were perfectly fine. The weather was clear, winds were moderate, visibility was great. So, nope, it wasn't the weather. So, with weather ruled out, you can probably guess where public suspicion turned next. Almost immediately, all eyes were on the plane itself, and specifically its manufacturer, Boeing. And look, that reaction is totally understandable, right? We all remember the two tragic crashes back in 2018 and 2019 that involved the Boeing 737 MAX. Those were caused by that faulty flight control system, MCAS, that kept pushing the plane's nose down. But, and this is absolutely critical, Flight MU-5735 was a 737-800. That's an older, totally different model. It's known as a reliable workhorse in the industry. And most importantly, it does not have that problematic MCAS software. So the big takeaway here is this. Whatever brought down Flight MU-5735, it wasn't that known software issue from the 737 MAX. The plane in this crash was actually considered one of the safest jets in the sky. And that, well, that forced investigators to turn their attention away from the machine and toward the people inside it. And that
And that leads us to the most unsettling explanation of all. It's a theory that has been gaining more and more traction among aviation experts, especially as all those other possibilities have been dismissed one by one. One aviation expert, Neil Hansford, he put it pretty bluntly. He compared this crash to Air France 447. You might remember that one. It went down because of technical problems and pilot confusion. But here's the thing. That plane descended slowly. MU-5735, he says, fell like a rock. That kind of description suggests either an accident on a scale we can barely imagine or something else entirely.
And then you've got Michael Daniel, a former investigator with the American Federal Aviation Administration. He was even more direct. He said that based on that nosedive, this crash was most likely the result of foul play. That someone intentionally forced that plane into its vertical dive. Now, as you can imagine, this kind of thing is incredibly rare. But it's not totally without precedent. There were two other crashes, Silk Air 185 and Egypt Air 990, that involved these same kinds of near-vertical nosedives. And in both of those cases, the official investigation concluded that the most likely cause was a deliberate act by a pilot. The similarities here, you have to admit, are pretty chilling. Of course, whenever you have a tragedy like this without a clear, immediate explanation, it creates a vacuum. And that vacuum, especially on Chinese social media, was quickly filled with all sorts of unfounded conspiracy theories. You had some people blaming foreign powers for the crash. It's really important to stress, though, that these theories are not based on any actual evidence that's been made available. Okay, so hearing a story like this, it can understandably make anyone a little nervous about getting on a plane. I get it. So let's just take a step back for a second and look at the bigger picture, because we need some context here. This number you're seeing, it's crucial. It's the fatal crash rate for the Boeing 737-800 series, the exact same model as flight MU-5735, and that rate is just 0.07 crashes for every 1 million flights. Think about that. It's an incredibly small, almost microscopic number. And just to put that in perspective even more, when you compare it to other popular aircraft models, the 737-800 series has a truly outstanding safety record. I mean, the data is crystal clear. This particular model is exceptionally safe. And you know, that's the reason why events like the UM5735 crash are so shocking to us. It's because they are so incredibly rare. So despite this horrifying mystery, the crucial thing to remember is that statistically, flying is still one of the absolute safest ways you can travel, period. But that doesn't solve the puzzle, does it? The black boxes were recovered, but the full story of what really happened inside that cockpit, it may never be made public. And so that leaves all of us with a truly haunting question. After looking at all the evidence, after ruling out all the obvious explanations, what do you think really happened to flight MU-5735?